Hello, I am the Dread Canary, and this is Not Against the Storm. This is a little game called Rogue Tower, a roguelite tower defense game. And the reason I'm playing this is to explain one of my life mottos, and that is that you can find wisdom everywhere. In this case, what I like about the roguelite theme of certain games is that just like in real life, you will face situations that you are not prepared for, that you don't have the tools or skills to deal with, and that the only way you gain those tools and skills is by facing them, oftentimes repeatedly. And then your initial successes are weak, they're not smooth, they're not sleek, they're not great plays. They just barely get you through that challenge, and then you're put right into a bigger challenge. And sometimes you get to go back and face the lesser challenges, and you find how much easier they have become. For the purposes of this video, I did reset my progress on Rogue Tower, and then I played a couple of games, so I've got a few things unlocked, but not much. And as you'll see, the number of minions coming in keeps getting bigger all the time. And I like that. But no, I'm not kidding. It really is something that happens in life. Like, if you think about it, imagine a toddler, right? At toddler age, you're learning to walk. You're learning what words mean. You're learning how to read, and all of that seems very overwhelming, to the point that a fall from standing, which at that age is like 8 inches up, feels shocking, catastrophic, and painful. And then you start going to school. And at school, you have to sit for longer than you've ever sat before and interact with other children, which you may or may not have experienced doing. And someone is leading the room and telling you what to do and when to do it, and they're grading your performance. And some of those challenges, they seem mighty hard. And then you get a little further along and they introduce you to a thing called math. And it seems weird and overwhelming. Like, for example, when I was 3rd grade, I had to learn my times tables all the way up to 12 times 12. I could get most of it, but the 6s, man, I could not get the 6s. I beat my head against the 6s for a long time before I could figure out how to remember what 6 times 7, 6 times 8, 6 times 9 were. Because our teacher was going to have each student recite one of the times tables. And of course, being a crafty teacher, she knew I had trouble with the 6s. So that's the one she gave me as extra motivation. And those 6s were overwhelming. And then later on, we got fractions. We got algebra. We got trigonometry. And I finally bailed at the end of high school with calculus. We started on calculus, it was half of one semester, and I just couldn't wrap my head around it. It didn't help that it was senior year, and I was kind of tired, and I was in a school with weighted grades because our classes were so much more involved than the local public schools. So I knew that I could basically stop interacting and I'd still get an A. That's it. New challenges that always feel overwhelming at the time, and then you develop the skills to deal with them. It's rather unfair that you have to develop the skills to deal with them after the fact. And I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of games are much more soothing, popular, is that the video game will usually say, here is a situation. You have everything you need. You'll be able to succeed. And that's great. But roguelike games don't do that. Roguelike games do something that I think is a lot more helpful for humanity. They say, here is a situation. You're not going to succeed. And that's fine. We don't expect you to succeed. What we expect you to do is to get as far as you can, and then you're gonna fail. You're gonna fail. But failure is okay, because in this context, and actually in most contexts, failure just means that you've now learned what doesn't work. I don't know if it's true, but growing up I heard a story about Thomas Edison that when they had tried, I don't know, 80, 100, 200 items to use as the filament for a light bulb, he wasn't getting anywhere. He had a ton of failures. And one of his assistants was like, we've done all of this and we haven't learned anything. And allegedly, Edison's response was, sure we have. We now know 100 things that don't work. And that's true. Of course, finding out the things that don't work isn't a very good search algorithm. If you're trying to find things that do work, it's helpful to pay attention to what worked well and what doesn't. For example, you'll notice I told these mortars that they should ignore anything with shields, not that anything with shields has come out yet, and they should focus on armor and health, and that is because they get a lot of damage versus armor. They get 384 per shot, but they only get 120 versus shields. And so, from playing this game, I've learned that mortars are not good against shields. That said, there are things I can do to fix it, but in this case it feels a little more efficient to just make other things good against shields, and use the mortars for what they are good at. You know, like Ender in Ender's game, where eventually he realized he had to delegate some command tasks to his friends. And when he did, he learned that Bean was really great with a small force that he could use tactically, whereas his other friends were better with broader scales and diverse armies. Of course, this does assume you've read the book. If you've only seen the movie adaptation, then I'm sorry, but you have not experienced Ender's Game. Because a lot of the heart of that took place inside Ender's head, in places that they could not fit into the movie. And of course, just like in life, you always have to keep going. Go to the next stage. You can't, there's no way to just stop, right? And be like, I've done enough. No, because it's not over. There's another wave. And you don't progress if you don't bring out the next wave, even knowing the next wave is going to be harder, even knowing the next challenge might be trigonometry or calculus. It might be learning to read in Spanish, which was a real trouble for me. I went to college, I was going to be a Spanish major, and I could talk in Spanish. Conversationally, I was great. My high school Spanish class got to the point by the end of my 4th year where we weren't allowed to speak English in the room. That was fantastic. But then I got to college, and the thing about college is I had to learn to read in Spanish. And I love reading. I love reading, and that was the problem. Because when I read in English, it's unconscious. I lose sense of the words that are in front of me, and I focus on the story, and I am lost. I'm not reading words anymore. The words kind of bypass my conscious thought, and it goes straight into a set of visual images of what I'm reading. It's fantastic. And it's been that way for decades. But when I got to reading Spanish, I couldn't do that. And I'm sad to say that I gave up. I just dropped out of the major, stopped going to class, and quit. Something that I'd planned on doing for years. Because it didn't come naturally and easily. And that was a problem. That's actually a problem that a lot of gifted students have, is we go through school, and school seems easy, We understand the rules there. But then, we don't know what it's like to overcome challenges. Because, as I said, in 3rd grade, my teacher made me learn my times tables, and I overcame that one. I couldn't avoid that. But when it got to calculus, I could avoid it, and not have any serious consequences. So I did. And I got to college. I could choose what classes I was taking. It was my money to waste if I, you know, failed a class. So I just failed a class. And unfortunately, that cemented a habit of not dealing with things that seemed too tough. It didn't serve me well. I had to unlearn that and learn that you should always, always, always face the next challenge. Like when these guys overwhelm me, I could refuse to admit defeat and I could just turn off the game. I could. And that's great, but it won't win me the game. Oh, I should mention that unlike other tower defenses, Rogue Tower always finishes on level 45. I should also say that there are 3 tiers of difficulty. One of them that starts you off with a single path that may eventually branch like this one did. But you can also start with 2 paths or 3 paths. And I will tell you that even once I unlocked everything, I think I've only managed to beat the 3 paths twice out of about 40 attempts. It gets hard. So if you are interested in this game for its own sake, it was made by a single dude. It's brilliant. I mean, the graphics are kind of clunky if you look. They're not like these are just cube graphics, and you can't rotate the map. That forced perspective does cause some annoyances, but overall, the gameplay loop, stellar, and this music goes hard. It goes way harder than it has to. Let's pick up poison bolts. Poison bolts are good against shields, which I haven't faced yet, but they're coming. Oh. See, the problem is, on level 15 you get a boss. He comes in on the longest path that you didn't just expand. So I should have had him come in up here, but I expanded up here, so he came in on this side instead. And unfortunately, my lack of paying attention may cost me the game. I mean, what might save me is that we picked up frost bolts. Those little blue bars means they're getting slowed as they move past these ballista. So slowing him down does give us more time to do damage. I do find that it helps with challenges to have a kick-ass soundtrack going now. Also true of real life. Getting a hype soundtrack really helps whenever I gotta do personal projects. Oh. Hey, we made it. He drops a treasure chest, so let's get some more damage against the armor. Let's get some more frost bolts. And keep going. And of course now, music shifts. Because we've entered a new stage. The stage where things with shields start coming out. I also like that in this game, you don't have to just set your defenses and stop. You can try to save your position in the moment as it's going through. So if I've got people making it all the way down here, I can build more defenses down here to try to catch them at the end. If I know that new types of enemies are coming out, I can rapidly spawn out a bunch of towers to try to intercept them. And that too is like life, because it's not like you go into a situation not having the skills to deal with it and you're automatically going to lose. You can develop them as the situation happens. You can get better at dancing well, dancing, even if you started off not good at dancing, by watching other people, mimicking their movements, and iterating. Now, and of course, when I say iterating, I do mean paying attention to what works and what didn't, and trying to figure out why, so that you can change your approach for the next go-round. Post-game analysis is always, always useful. As long as you take every experience as a learning opportunity. Ooh, freezing bolts. Gives us a chance to make things stop in place. Let's grab that. If you really want to stretch it, one other lesson that you can grab from this game that does apply to life is the notion of marginal utility. The idea that the more of something you have, the less useful it becomes, or in this case, the more expensive it becomes. I don't know if you noticed, but every time I drop a ballista, the cost of that ballista goes up by 10, and every time I drop a mortar, it goes up by 75. What that does is reinforce the idea that having some ability to deal with things is good, but it doesn't scale infinitely. And for most of us, that is also kind of true of life. Learning a little bit of programming, helpful. But the extent to which programming is helpful goes down the more of it you learn, because you are learning edge cases. You're learning scenarios that don't come up as often. Still helpful, especially if you spend all of your time in that field where you're going to see those edge cases more often. But not as much of a leap as it was from when you went from no knowledge to a little knowledge. The increase in your ability goes down, even if you're learning the same amount. Maybe that doesn't make sense. Let's think of it in terms of percentages. Like, if you have 0 pies, you have no pie. Getting even a slice of pie is mathematically infinitely better than no pie. Getting a second slice of pie doubles your amount of pie, because you went from 1 slice to 2 slices, double the amount. If you go from 2 slices to 3 slices, you've increased your amount of pie by 50%. You went first pie, infinite gain. Second slice of pie, 100% gain. You doubled it. Third slice of pie, 50% gain, because you had 2 slices already. Now you have a third. The amount of increase is 50%. Increase. You still gained the same amount of pies you did the last 2 times, but the increase in the amount of pie you have went down. When you go to a fourth slice of pie, I should say, it's a 33% increase. That fifth slice, that's a 25% increase. I'll notice that the rate at which the change is going down is slowing. We went from infinite down to 100%. We went from 100 down to 50, but then we only went from 50 down to 33, and then from there down to 25, and next we'll be down to 20, and then it's down to like 16. So you're always improving, getting a little more, always helpful, and it's often worth it. But at some point, the amount of increased utility you get does not scale with the amount of effort you put into getting it. And that's going to change depending on your situation. A computer programmer who programs for a living may benefit from even a 2 or 1% increase in their total skills. Especially if they're at the highest level, where that 1% increase can mean a massive jump in pay. Athletics would actually be a great example of this. It's not the top 1% of football or basketball players or soccer players that command big salaries. It's a fraction of a percentage, and those little bits, those minor edges, are worth it for them. But for people who just want to play in their office softball league, that's overkill. That's not the main part of your life. There's other things to focus on. And this game does encourage you to do that. By raising the cost, it makes it so that variety is rewarded in some ways more than specialization. Of course, I should have been careful because I finally built buildings that need mana. And so now I'm starting to run out of resources. I've overcommitted to a strategy. And now I've got a course correct mid-game. Just as I was saying I would have to. Anyway, my point is this. It's a simple to play game. But games are a microcosm. We play games that we like to play, that humans like doing, and what we like about them is that we can feel like we have mastery in a way that we don't often get to feel in real life. The feedback is faster. But it's running on the same learning systems that we use for our day-to-day lives. It's the same skills. You're learning in the same ways. That's why I think you can get applicable life skills if you think about what's happening in a game, you think about how success in a game can be applied to the rest of your life. I first learned this with The Sims 2, way back in, I want to say, 2006. Microcosm of adult life, it taught me how to make the patterns I needed to be a successful adult. Now, when people around me say adulting is hard, I'm like, no, it's not. It's a children's video game. It's just a children's video game that's slower. And the feedback loops are less tight, so it's not always as obvious what is giving you the results you want. But it's still there. It's the same thing. So if you can learn it in the game, you can use it outside the game. You may have to finagle it a bit, but you can. If you want. Another thing, let's throw this in here too. I mentioned earlier how mortars aren't great against shields. But they're not useless. Sometimes, even being able to do something poorly can make progress on a goal. Let's go ahead and take the mana bank would increase my maximum mana as well as my mana per second. The university is useless until level 25 and shrines start coming out. Let's go ahead and take the university. I may have gone a bit too hard on this one row. I wanted to give myself a big run up for the boss is coming at level 25, but now these two are coming too close together, and my people are having trouble. My defenses are having trouble thinning them out in time. sometimes when you really need something, you can focus really hard on it. So like I've been building a lot of new towers. But I can also just make this one tower really good. And I could shore up its weakness against armor. That's going to be expensive and it's not going to be terribly effective. Or the other option, since I already have mortars for covering its armor weakness, I can shore up its damage against shields. Just make this one very good at sapping enemy shields quickly. Both strategies are viable. It really depends on the kind of life you want to live, whether you focus on building skills to overcome your weaknesses, or if you focus on your strengths to hyper-specialize and maybe pay someone else to cover for those weaknesses. I suspect that not many pro athletes are also great chefs, because they spend all their time becoming pro athletes. Learning how to be a moderately good cook is a useful skill to have if you have to cook most of your own meals, especially on a budget. So both strategies are viable. It depends on your situation. Sometimes what you want is to shore up a weak skill, and sometimes you want to have it covered in other ways. Let's go ridiculous. Ah, yes, scholarships. They'll make my university better. Pretty soon here, the game is going to start introducing problems that spawn other problems, where you need to deal with multiple stacking problems at once. For example, these vampires turn into bats when they die. And those bats move fast. Life does that too. At least my life does. Hands me problems that solving causes more problems. Give you a new layer of your problem cake. But the key is to keep calm and do what you can think to do. And if you get overwhelmed, try again. Come a long way from getting one guy coming in on this row back here. this time, we're going to have learned from our mistake. Because if you recall, last time I continued advancing this row, and Oogie, the boss, spawned over here. Well, now I'm going to make sure he spawns in that row by expanding a different line. And there he is. Coming in right where he was expected. Successfully cleared out everything before Oogie, and that means we can focus on just this row. Which will be important, as you'll see in a moment, because he has minions. I'm not talking about the ones he's walking with. It's actually really good progress. And I think that's enough Rug Tower for you today. I will, of course, resume my regular streaming schedule of Against the Storm on Friday nights at 9:30 Eastern and Sundays at 4 Eastern until I have finished 2 cities, and of course, continue to put those videos here on YouTube afterward. So in case you ever want to go back and see one or watch it again, or even just catch up on ones you may have missed, you're welcome to. In the meantime, I've been Dread Canary. Thank you for sitting with me while I ramble about the wisdom we can find in silly little roguelite tower defense games, and have yourself a great day.